I'm here with Kevin Handlin, who just took this Bant Humans deck to a top 8 finish in the Untapped Open League. Kevin, what do you have to say about this deck?
Man, this was the hottest run I've ever had in a tournament. I went undefeated in Swiss, and yeah, it's so fun to play and so rewarding to learn. I couldn't wait to share it with the world.
And you went 5-0-1 in the Swiss, correct?
Yeah, so I had to take an unintentional, or rather, I had to take an intentional draw with my round five Swiss opponent just because of timing issues. And that was fine. It actually would have gone to game three, and we couldn't find a time to play our third game. So I would have gone probably, presumably, completely 6-0, but I went 5-0 with a draw.
And you were the only undefeated player, correct?
Correct, yeah, I finished King of the Hill.
Yeah, and even the guy who you drew with got into the top 8.
Yep, absolutely.
So let's
And
start off. Oh, go ahead.
that was actually my podcast co-host, Kevin Finkel,
Oh,
and
yeah, that's
one of
right.
your friends in the Cockatrice League. So,
Yeah, he's a real good guy.
yeah, he's
Well, let's
great.
start out with a mana base here.
Yeah,
Anything in particular you want to point out?
so I really want to talk about how important it is in an aggressive deck for all of your lands to enter untapped. Because you want to be making, in an aggro style strategy, you want to be dropping at least one creature every turn. Oftentimes, that's going to look like a one drop on turn one, a two drop on turn two, and a one drop plus a two drop on turn three, or a really nice, powerful three drop. And that's really where, in a lot of aggro decks, your curve is going to top out, right? But we go a little higher in this deck because of Collected Company. So it was really, really important for me to have my lands enter untapped. And so going into this, I saw that there were the new lands coming out of, well, not necessarily new, but the reprinted Czech lands coming out of Ixalan, that there were actually two for the Bant colors. So there's Glacial Fortress, I think it's called,
Yep.
and Sun Petal Grove. And this deck is primarily a green white deck with a blue splash for Reflector Mage and sideboard options. So I went really, really heavy on the green white. I do believe I had, let me take a look at the mana base here. Yeah, so 4 basic plains, 3 basic forests, because the primary color of the human tribe is always going to be white. And then 3 basic forests, because it's really important for some of our 2 drops. It's important for our removal that we be hitting a green source on turn 2. And then various ways to get the blue source by turn 3. And so almost, I would say about 80% of the time I get a white source on turn 1, a green source on turn 2, and a blue source on turn 3. And it's not the end of the world if I don't get a blue source by turn 3, because I'm not always drawing Reflector Mages. So usually getting 3 lands untapped every turn. Well, not 3 lands every turn, but an untapped land every turn leading up to turn 4. And then after that, it's irrelevant.
So you also chose to run way more basics than you see in most 3-color decks.
Yeah, I took a look at a lot of different Bant Humans lists before going into this tournament, and one thing that I consider, like a lot of things that people do when they try out decks, is like, oh, these spells are cool. Oh wow, I like the way these cards look together. And like the first thing that I do in my first probably like 4 or 5 matches with a deck is just consider how the mana base is working. And yeah, like I noticed that I kind of just always wanted more basics. Like I didn't always need, I never needed a second Canopy Vista. I never needed a second Prairie Stream. Like once I hit my first Prairie Stream, I had enough blue sources to do everything that I wanted to do. So I trimmed a lot of the Tango lands that people like to run in 3-color decks, especially in Bant, and just opted for a lot more basics.
So something nice about this Bant Humans deck is you never see any double mana symbols in the cards. It's always like a white, a green, or a white
Right.
green, a white blue.
Single
So you
pips.
really get away with those basics.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the better things about the deck. The only thing that really has double pips in the deck, well, nothing in the current configuration. We'll talk a little bit about changes I would make, and then there's a single card that would have a double pip in it. But
So let's move on to the creatures. Everything's obviously revolving around Thalia's lieutenant, but what is the rest of the base of the creatures?
yeah, so every single creature you want to have impact on the early game and impact on the late game. So the I would say the star of the deck, like the thing that makes it a deck that beats other aggro decks, is Glory Bound Initiate. And that was always the biggest beating throughout my Swiss run was dropping a Glory Bound Initiate on turn 2. Like that was absolutely a nut. If you could get that going, then you can get 10-point life swings at any point in the game with Dramoka's command. And so it ends up being this huge ordeal for your opponent because you can do Dramoka's commands in response to your own exert triggers and get 5 points of life gain off of like before they can even declare blocks. It's really great.
And that's a bare minimum without any pumps from Thalia's lieutenant or something like that.
Right, correct. That's before Thalia's lieutenants. And so yeah, like that was definitely the first time that I did that. I was like, wow, this deck is it's got the thing. Like it's got what I need. Thraben Inspector is awesome. I think it's the ideal one drop for not only humans decks, but I think it's one of the three best one drops in the format. And it's something that you don't mind drawing in the late game because it comes with a rebate. And in fact, I never even minded recurring it with Renegade Ralliers because if I had played out my entire hand, it was just more longevity into the late game that would give me a little bit of a boost, another chance to get a Collected Company or a Thalia's Lieutenant. And so that ended up being really important.
So you just talked about Thraben Inspector with Renegade Rallier and buying it back with Renegade Rallier. But another cool thing that Thraben Inspector does that I've noticed in the deck is you can crack the clue to trigger Revolt for your Renegade Ralliers.
Yeah, absolutely. That can be really huge, especially on like turn 5. Like you crack a clue, draw a card, and then play your Renegade Rally or get back something really awesome from the graveyard, whether it's like another land, and then you can store that for either like another Renegade Rallier or like a clue off of a tireless tracker. And honestly, like I could go on and on and on about like how deeply the synergies go in this deck. And I think that whereas in standard, like if you had a Thraben Inspector and a tireless tracker, like those two were a really good duo. I would say Renegade Rallier just ties it up, and those are like the three musketeers of the deck. Like those are what turn you into a tempo deck that just grinds forward into the late game and allows you to beat bigger creature decks and control and things of that nature.
So talking about synergy with Tireless Tracker and the deck in general, you have a 1-up Obzen Falconer. That's not a card that we got to see in standard, I don't believe, with Bant Humans.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't one that. No, yeah, it was in here. So in Bant Humans' heyday, it didn't get a chance to be. That would have been really cool because you can hit it off of Collected Company, and I think there are a couple other Outlast creatures that you can hit off of Collected Company. There's Enoch Bonkin, which gives all your creatures first strike that have counters on them. I think that's the only other Outlast. Oh, and then there's the Trample one that I can't remember the name of. But Abzan Falconer is just, it's a trump card when you're doing aggro versus aggro because it gets you out of these huge board stalls. So it makes it so that there's more hits that you can get off of Collected Company that put you ahead in an aggro mirror. And so, I mean, we'll get to it in a little bit, but basically there are considerations for every single other archetype in this deck, and they're all based around the creatures, and that's the best part of it.
So I wanted to point out a pet card of both of ours that you're running a total of 4 of in the 75 that you don't often see is more than 2, and Thalia Heretic Cathar. What was your reasoning for running 4 in your 75?
So it actually started as a happy accident. So former player of the year, Jeremy Dizani, he plays Frontier in Japan, and he is also a Bant Humans enthusiast. And there was an article that came out about his original list, and there was a typo that listed that he had 4 Thalia Heretic Cathar in his main deck. Like not in the 75, in his main deck. And so that got me scratching my head and really curious. And I was talking to all my friends, and I was like, that seems very, very wrong, but I'm going to try it. And the first thing that I wanted to try it against was Cat Combo.
So
And they couldn't beat it.
yeah, cat combo is almost no way of beating Thalia Heretic Cathar, and if you just drop it on turn 3, it slows down their game plan significantly, because now they're not only focused on removing her, but if they can't do that, then all their tempo goes out the window from all their non-basics that they have to run. So
Right,
Thalia
exactly.
does so much game against that deck specifically. But how do you feel like she is in other matchups?
Well, she's really great against Atarka Red because it turns off haste, and she's pretty great against Abzan. If you can manage a win against Abzan, it's going to be off of the combination of Reflector Mage and Thalia Heretic Cathar, because that stops their giant blockers from blocking your early aggression. So, granted, they'll have removal, and they'll have removal that can hit your Thalia, but in the lucky chances where you can steal a game off of Abzan or Jund, Thalia is going to be the way that you do it.
So is there anything else you want to touch on in the main board?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the great things about Bant Humans is it has so many interactions between all of its cards that allow you to like push forward basically. So you can leave up a collected company and pass the turn, which is how a lot of people like to play collected company, just to see how you get to react to your opponent. And then depending on what they play, you can then choose what you want out of your deck, and it can be like a glory bound initiate and a reflector mage. You bounce one thing and then have a Dramoka's command in hand and remove their other threat, and then that allows you to get an alpha strike in. So basically the whole idea behind the deck is to get your turn 4 or turn 5 alpha strike with your Thalia's Lieutenant, and it has a myriad methodologies to accomplish that, basically.
So it's around turn 4 or 5 when you're really hoping to turn the corner with this deck.
Yeah, turn 4 or turn 5 is where I'm trying to get a win, and then I'm usually going to leverage beyond that point. That's where I'll start bringing in tireless trackers, and I don't really care about getting flooded at that point because I'll have tireless trackers to turn those into cards. So I can go long game, but I prefer to end early.
So do you want to move on to the sideboard?
Yeah, totally. So the sideboard is actually what I would change the most in this deck going forward. So I included 2 Shaper Sanctuaries for this tournament, and that was a new card that I was very, very excited about in Ixalan, where basically like the things that you end up boarding in are going to be either for like prominent combo decks or other classic archetypes, right? So there are things that you board in for control, and there are things that you board in for creature matchups and aggro. So we have 2 Shaper Sanctuary, and specifically what I like to board in Shaper Sanctuary for is when I'm on the play against control. So it'll typically be for like if control has scraped out a game 3 against me, that's when I will bring in my Shaper Sanctuaries. Or if they took first game win, that's when I'll bring in my Shaper's Sanctuaries. And then they come back out if I'm on the draw for counter spells. And so it ends up being this really good, like, proactive strategy that you can take against them because you drop a Shaper's Sanctuary on turn one, and then your creatures are safe going forward into turns, I would say, like, two, three, and four. And then you have plenty of opportunity to deal with their board wipes that they start throwing at you. And then I had two Irration Clerics for a Tarka Red. And that was a really board in, board out. So I would just swap out my Lambholt Pacifists for two Irration Clerics. It didn't change my curve at all. And it was a really great thing to hit off of Collected Company. And it's something that can be recurred with Renegade Rallier. And with that and Glorybound Initiate and Dramoka's Command, it's just really, really hard for a Tarka Red to push through, assuming that you're hitting your land drops. So that ended up being super important in my round 5. Was it round 5? Round 5 match with Somnus, who was on Shrapnel Red. And he just couldn't get through it. And yeah, and they get another really great thing about Eric is it's a human, so it gets the boost from Thalia's Lieutenant, and 2/4 is a very relevant stat to have after a counter from Thalia's Lieutenant, because most of the creatures are going to be getting to 3 power in a Tarka Red on a good day. So you're able to block easily any Goblin token or Monastery Swift Spear, or you can even no, you can't trade with an Abbot of Carol Keep, but you can block a Monastery Swift Spear or a Soulscar Mage. So it's pretty solid.
So one card in your sideboard that sticks out to me is the powerhouse Gideon Ally of Zendikar. Normally that's a great card, but in a deck like this, it kind of comes up as an alarm because it doesn't interact with Collected Company. It's not a human. Is it just so good as a mid-range card that you just need to put it in your sideboard against other mid-range decks and control decks, or what is your reasoning for Gideon?
Yeah, so that's actually something that we brought into the game post-season, or into the deck post-season, that we ended up cutting from... We ended up cutting 2 other cards for. So I took out a Phyrexian Revoker that I had left over from my original list, as well as a Deathgorge Scavenger, which I had in there just in case I ran into graveyard strategies, and it didn't end up being very effective throughout the tournament, so I pulled that out, and I put in 2 Gideon Ally of Zendikar. So a couple things to note about Gideon Ally is, first off, it's an absolute beating against control. It's very hard for them to interact with if they're not hitting their Vraska's Contempts, and that is a great card that Blue-Black Control recently got. But still, I mean, you're not going to be running 4 Vraska's Contempts. So having a Gideon on board is usually really, really, really hard for control to beat, especially if they allow it to resolve. And the second thing to note about Gideon Ally of Zendikar is that he's a human. So he gets to keep counters from Thalia's Lieutenant and be this growing threat throughout every turn. Not only that, but he synergizes so incredibly well with Dramoka's Command, because it basically turns your Dramoka's Command into hard removal. Whereas, like, in a lot of instances, it ends up looking like soft removal, because Gideon, when he is animated, is indestructible. He can usually destroy any other creature other than, like, an Eldrazi Titan if he fights it. So that ends up being very relevant. Yeah, my greatest regret in Season 2 of the Untap Open League was not finding room in my 75 for a couple Gideons.
So moving back to the creatures, you have 2 Minglehorn in there, which once again does not synergize with the humans. Is that ability just to destroy an artifact and make them come and tap just so useful that you're willing to forgo the typing?
It's specifically there for Marvel. Okay. Like, it ends up being so critically important in the Marvel matchup because in every other matchup, Thalia does the same thing that Manglehorn does, right? Like it basically gives you a time walk. And so if I can afford a time walk against a deck that's trying to crank out Eldrazi Titans early, that ends up being super valuable because I'm trying to go under them. And so I can afford to have a creature that doesn't get the boosts from my tribal payoffs to punch through and get that turn 4 or 5 kill. And sometimes with Manglehorn, it ends up being 2 time walks because their next Marvel ends up entering tapped, assuming that they have a backup Marvel. So it's very valuable against that deck.
So is there anything else you want to touch in the sideboard?
Um, no, I think that about covers it. We've got another Thalia and another Tireless Tracker in the sideboard, and that's just to bring in against various archetypes. I specifically like having 4 Thalia in my deck post board for um, for Saheeli combo because you never don't want Thalia. Like I will keep hands with 3 Thalia Heretic Cathar in them against that matchup. So like it's just always good, and they always want to remove it because they can't win if there's a Thalia on the board. So yeah, it's something I always want.
So moving forward, what changes would you make to the deck, if any?
So something that you'll notice I haven't talked about much was other than in reference to I board this out against certain matchups. I have not mentioned the 2 Lambhold passive.
Right.
And I find that to be a very lackluster creature in such a proactive strategy. Specifically, I think that um, in a deck that wants to be playing a creature on turn 3, it's not very effective to be running Lambholt Pacifist because you're relying on your opponent to let it flip. Like it's there to punish stumbles, right? And there are so many other ways to punish your opponent for stumbling, such as attacking for 8. You know what I mean? So the first thing that I would do going into this deck, other than finding room for 2 Gideons in the sideboard, would be getting rid of my Lambholt Pacifist. And there's a couple different things that you can do. A lot of people have been going forward in our metagame looking at ways to add a 4th color to Splash. And I don't think that's the play that I want for Frontier. I don't know how you feel about the 4th color.
No, I agree that this Bant deck is just very streamlined, and adding a 4th color kind of convolutes it.
Absolutely. It makes your mana a lot weaker. We just spent so much time talking about how all of my lands enter untapped. Like, when you add a 4th color, the chances of you getting an untapped land on turn 2 greatly diminish, and that's your most important turn. I would say I looked back to a more simpler layout of the deck, and I took some liner notes from White Weenie. And something that really struck me in Mono White Humans was Kithion, Hero of Akros. So if you add in 2 Kithion, it ends up reducing your curve a little bit in your deck, which is really great because that means that you can hold back your collected companies for another turn if you want to play, let's say, like a Rallier and a Kithion on turn 4. And that's very, very valuable against decks that are specifically holding up interaction with your collected company to make sure it doesn't destroy them. So you end up having an even more effective collected company on turn 5 because you can hit a Thalia's Lieutenant or a Reflector Mage and punch through for a whole bunch of damage and then flip your Kithion and have a Planeswalker in addition to this gigantic board that can protect it. So that's what I've been really enjoying. The other thing that you can put in that slot is a couple Jace Bryn's Prodigy, and that gives you a way to recur your collected companies, which is something that Luis Scott Vargas was really popular for doing when he was running Bant Company back in Standard. So that's the other change I would make to the deck going forward.
So something else I want to touch on with Kithion is the recent Planeswalker change rule now makes having Gideon flip not be so punishing if you do board in your other Gideon.
Right, yeah. So the way that a lot of people are taking this on in the new metagame with the Planeswalker rule change is that they want to have, let's say, some mix of Gideon of the Trials and Gideon Ally of Zendikar. And this is just kind of like the humans' take on that because you can't hit either of those off of Collected Company, but you can't hit Kithion. So it's yeah, it doesn't punish you for boarding in your Gideon Ally of Zendikar, and in fact, like they work pretty well together because your Knight Ally token isn't going to be attacking, and Gideon I think it's Battleforged is the one that Kithion flips into.
Yeah,
Gideon
Battleforged.
He can make that Knight Ally token indestructible. So you just have an indestructible blocker to deal with whatever they try to throw at your planeswalkers.
So is there anything else you want to touch on in the deck?
No, I loved playing this deck, and I would encourage anyone who's trying to break into the format to give it a shot and give yourself probably 5 or 6 games to learn it because you end up finding out that it's not quite as simple as it looks. Like it looks like a deck where you just dump your entire hand, and sometimes you have to play the control, and sometimes you have to turn your creatures into good removal, and you learn that over time.
Well, thanks for joining me, Kevin, and great job taking this deck to top 8, being the only pilot on Bant Humans this season.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of fun, and thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to playing season 3 with you, man.
Yeah, good luck in the next season.
Yeah, likewise.